Welcome to a conversation about mental health. Brought to you by RED. Rescue, empower, deploy.
Well, a very special good morning to everyone, and a welcome to everyone who's tuning in online and in the overflow room. It's a great honor and privilege to be with you here today, and I don't know why you've come, but I hope that for whatever reason, if it be I want to learn how to work with people and help people, or I know someone who could really use a good conversation and I want to learn how to start a conversation, or if you yourself are struggling in one area or another, I hope that there is something in this for everyone today. And the truth is, we've only got 2 sessions. We're not going to solve everyone's problems. We can't wave magic wands, but we can start a conversation. And it's a great starting point, especially post-pandemic, to be able to know a thing or two about this vortex called mental health. But before I get going, I just want to acknowledge the traditional elders and the custodians of the land in which we stand or sit today. And I bring, a warm greeting from my own family up on the Sunshine Coast. Let me just start before I get going and say, I love my wife. Married for 22 years, and for as long as I have breath in my lungs, I will continue to declare my love for that woman. And the truth of the matter is, who knows, life on your own, journeying in difficult spaces, in deep, dark valleys, that's tough on your own. But yea, though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we fear no evil because we're not alone. And thank God that we've got community here, a community of allied health professionals, a church community, a local community from the region, that we can do life together. As the age-old saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, let's go together. And so thank you for coming together to start a conversation about mental health today. And look, I'm excited. Because this isn't really a topic that you get excited about, really, is it? It's kind of a bit heavy, and so I hope that it's okay if we have a little bit of fun today as well. Because personally, I believe people learn best when having fun. But there is a serious side to it. And so if I was to start by handing out the microphone, coming into the audience and putting the microphone in your face and asking the question, what's the first thing you think of? It's a typical psychology thing to ask, isn't it? It's like, oh, association, I can play this game. What's the first thing you think of when you hear the term mental health? If we were to take the microphone out into the community, chances are the number one response would be depression, followed closely by anxiety. Maybe then followed up with things like addiction or relationship problem fallout, or drug issues, or even personality issues. It seems to be more and more popular these days. But I have a question. Why is it that the first thing we think of when we hear the term mental health is actually pathology? If you went out to the street and asked the same question, hey, what's the first thing you think of when you hear the term physical health? You won't hear people say broken leg or global pandemic. No, people say full of vitality, energy, feel good in my body and my soul and in my mind, clear thinking. Why is it that when it comes to mental health, we typically think of mental illness instead of health? It's a good question to start the conversation with, don't you think? And maybe one of the reasons why we think of mental illness is because allied health professionals like myself and those who are in the room, well, we don't typically specialize in advancing health. When you think about it, what we do is we specialize in helping people with problems. In other words, when somebody gets knocked back in life and they go back into minus, we come along as almost like the GPS system that says in 300 meters, turn left. We're a guidance system that helps bring or restore a person back to their original starting position called zero or neutral. We show the way. We don't drive the way. That's the responsibility of the client that we might be working with, but we can advise the best way to the intended destination. This is what we know through research. This is what we know through practical application. If that's your goal, to be restored, to be rescued, to be reconciled, well then let's go on a journey together. And so we help people arrive at their original position called zero. That's why I have a bit of an issue when it comes to mental health. I actually like to refer to the topic that we're going to talk about today as mental wealth. Because if you think about this in financial terms, if you've been knocked back into minus, you would now be in what we classify as debt. And if a financial advisor comes along and advises you as to this is the best way to climb yourself out of the pit that you have fallen into and be restored to your original starting position, where are you now? How much money do you have? All right, you're broke. That's not health. That's not wealth. So why don't we go one step further? Instead of a conversation today about just how we can overcome depression, anxiety, addiction, and all of the problems, what if we got to zero and then went beyond zero into plus, so that we actually end up feeling that same vitality, that vibrance, where I can think clearly, where I can think creatively, I can be articulate in my communication and my relationships, that I can go from strength to strength. Am I the only one getting excited here? I'm like, this is a conversation worth having. Not just how do I recover from my problems, but how do I truly tap into mental well-being? That's a conversation worth having. In fact, I saw a movie not so long ago. I couldn't even tell you what the name of the movie is, and to be honest, it was actually quite graphic, so I'm not necessarily recommending this movie to you. But nonetheless, there was some key points that jumped out at me that I thought were kind of worth sharing in a forum like this. Now, the movie setting was in the Highlands of Scotland from hundreds of years ago, where rival tribes were fighting each other. And like taking a page out of the story of David and Goliath, instead of the entire clan fighting, what they would tend to do is they'd take a champion from each of the clans, and the two champions would fight, and of course the winner would take all. But in this particular movie, the one tribe stole the champion from another tribe, and they got this champion to do their fighting on their behalf. But this champion, he was not free. He was a slave. He was captive. So once the fight was over, they would, capture him again and put him into a prison cell where he would await his next fight. But then thankfully, one night with the help of a young boy, they managed to escape captivity and they made their way over the Highlands of Scotland. And they chanced upon another clan. And this group of actually crusaders, I think they were, they wanted to know if this guy was friend or foe. And so the young boy explained that this one-eyed warrior, he was formerly a captive. He was in slavery, but now he'd been set free. To which the chief of the clan asked the question, "So, now you've got your freedom, what do you plan to do with your freedom?" And it flew off the screen and hit me full force as I thought to myself, that right there is the conversation that we're having right here. Rather than just being free from addiction, free from depression, free from anxiety, now that we've got our freedom, what do we want to do next? You see, being set free is not just being set free from something, but rather it's also being set free to do something, or being set free for a purpose. So if you want your freedom, what do you want it for? It's an important question to start the conversation with anyone that you might be working with. And the question is basically what? What is it that you would like to achieve? Or what would you like to have? What would you like to experience? And most people are able to get that far in the conversation. Oftentimes it might start with, I want, the what is freedom from, but we don't have to necessarily stay there. And the way in which we can transition out of the from towards the to and the for is simply by asking the question, why? So the first question is, what do you want? And the second question is, why do you want it? Now, for most people, they would typically describe the difficulty that they are experiencing, and it's so unpleasant that I don't want that anymore, and that's the reason why. But can I just point out that right there is what we classify in psychology as negative motivation. Now this is great. Negative motivation is awesome because it pricks your conscience into wanting to do something. I know that I have this experience usually right after Christmas. And so I stand in front of the mirror after Christmas dinner and I'm standing there going, this is not okay. I don't know what, the side profile is worse. And okay, so I'm so convicted that I'm going to do something about it, and it's called, wait for it, a New Year's resolution. In other words, I'm going to get fit and I'm going to get healthy. This is the year. Now, chances are, if you set yourself a New Year's resolution this year, because the year is rapidly coming to a close, well, that may well be the same New Year's resolution that you set for yourself last year, and possibly even the year before that and the year before that. Hang on just a second. Statistics show that most people, as in up to 90% of people, have already bailed on their New Year's resolution within the third week of January. And the reason why is because negative motivation, although it's great, it gets you to the starting line, it almost never helps you cross the finishing line. In order to experience true transformation, you need what's referred to in ancient proverbs as a renewing of your mind. You need a renewing of the motivation. You need to transition from negative motivation into positive motivation, which is a desire of your heart for something good in your life. So if negative motivation is defined as what I don't want anymore, ask the question, okay, so what is it that you do want? A number of years ago, my wife and I were watching the Australian TV show, which no doubt was replicated around the world, called Australia's Biggest Loser. I'm not sure if that's still on TV at some obscure place in the world, but my wife said to me, come on, let's watch this together. It'll be good bonding time. To which I'm like, really? I don't know. She's like, yes, this is like not just team sports. This is an individual sport. This is a battle against themselves. Now, I need to point out, my wife is also a clinical psychologist. Please pray for us. We need all the help we can get. You should be a fly on the wall in our kitchen when we're having an argument. And so she's wanting to psychoanalyze, what is it that inspire people to make significant transformation and change in their life? And so I agreed to the couples therapy and we watched the first and the last episode. That's all I could commit to. The first and the last episode. She watched the entire thing. But on the first episode, I was amazed as the host would interview the various different contestants and ask the question, why is it that you want to lose weight? And so the people gave a variety of different answers, which ranged from, because I feel like I've got no energy. And I feel so unhealthy in my body. In fact, I can't even walk up the flight of stairs without feeling like I'm going to have a coronary heart attack. Or another person said, I can't have children. Another person said they disliked themselves so much. It was something along the context of, look in front of the mirror, I don't see a person, I see a truck. So it was a really self-depraving. And then I watched the final episode. And to my surprise, the host asked the exact same question. So why is it that you want to continue losing weight? Now, I was shocked because these people had shrunk, significantly so, had lost amazing amounts of weight, and they were being asked the question, why do you want to continue? I'm like, you don't need to, stop here. You'll fade away into nothing. And yet the answers amazed me. One person said, because I want to have the energy to run down the beach with my children. Another person said, because I want to have children. I said to my wife, I don't know if you spotted it, but this right here isn't just boot camp and starving yourself. There's been a renewing of the mind that has taken place. They went from 100% negative motivation, I don't want this in my life anymore, to 100% positive motivation, no, this is what I do want in my life, and that right there is a key question for mental health. The very next question is, okay, so if that's what you want and that's why you want it, and by the way, the fastest way to transition from negative to positive motivation is to simply ask yourself the question, so what am I grateful for? Yeah. And what is it that I want more of? What do I appreciate? that I would like to actually cultivate more of in my life? And once you're able to arrive at that positive why, now you need to ask the next question, which is, of course, when? Okay, so when will you achieve the what by? Because in our day and age, let me just be honest, and at the risk of offending some people, especially in the mental health arena, we don't necessarily work towards transformation. In our day and age, we specialize in coping. And it's great, it's important to develop great coping mechanisms to survive the journey, but it's a little bit like spending millions of dollars every year on our mental health infrastructure on defensive driving classes.
Yeah, wow.
And this is good because if you get a flat tire, if you get a blowout, well, you'll need to know what to immediately do. So the first thing that we'll be encouraged to do is press on the hazard lights. In other words, let everyone know you are in trouble. And so we do. We've got a culture now where you won't believe what happened to me. And we love to tell it. And it's great because at least we're talking about it. But if you're telling more than 3 people about your problems, maybe you're not looking for help. Maybe you're just looking for attention. Because there is great social credit to be gained these days by having challenges and problems. And so that might scratch the itch to a certain extent. So put your hazard lights on and let everybody know. And not only that, maybe use your handbrake instead of the foot brake. You'll shred less rubber on the tire. It'll help preserve the car when slowing down. You won't spin out of control. Can I just say, these coping mechanisms are brilliant because they might just help save a life. But can I also add that if that's all we do, if we only ever cope and then just keep on driving, it's a little bit like that old-fashioned Codral cold and flu tablet ad. I don't know if you remember that. Like some of you are from my generation, you remember that song on TV? Soldier on with Codral, soldier on. So it's almost like, hey, if you get sick, just take these tablets and go back to work. No, not after COVID. We don't do that anymore. Isolation, masks, spray. Like this, the idea is that in our modern day and age, if we can't just cope.
Yeah.
If you keep driving when you have an emotional flat tire, it's only a matter of time before you crash. Therefore, in our conversation about mental health, it is also important to go one step further and consider how do we actually pull the vehicle over and change the tire? Because the good news is, if you can learn how to change the tire, well, then you can get back on the racetrack of life and drive with confidence, where we're not just coping with our challenges. No, we have experienced true, authentic transformation. And in a day and age where it's not encouraged in Australia, even some of you mental health professionals and allied health professionals, please forgive me because I'm a bit of a crusader on this. Well, it's so unfamiliar with this that it's almost like sacrilegious to even mention it. Transformation, no, that's not possible. That's not true. Transformation is definitely possible. Okay, so we might pull out the extreme cases of what about that individual and that individual? Well, I'm not necessarily talking about transforming an entire life. I'm saying let's transform starting with the mind. What if we just went from negative motivation to positive motivation? That right there is transformation. And what could happen next? Well, who knows? Let's go on a journey and find out.
Yeah, that's great.
They're simply conversation starters. No magic wands here today, just conversation starters to get our head into the right space. So when I say when will you experience this by? Well, now the rubber hits the road, because traditionally it wouldn't be when, it would just be, oh, and how does that make you feel? As the conversation continues and repeats itself session after session, year after year. Research shows that if you're seeing a professional, a clinical psychologist for some kind of intervention, and you haven't seen any significant change within 4 consultations, the statistical probability of you seeing any change now decreases significantly with every subsequent session. That right there was a stinger if I ever heard one. Because this speaks to me. This is my pressure. It's like my profession. Well, pressure too. Like, dun, 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 dun. Under pressure. Like, I've got 4 sessions to try and somehow make a breakthrough. But no, that would be me misguiding the process. The pressure's not on me. I just have to understand what are the principles or what are the conversation starters that would help facilitate a light bulb moment for an individual whereby I've been doing this for so long. And how's that working out for you? Still there. Well, as we all know, the definition of insanity is to keep on doing the same thing, hoping for a different outcome. So what if we changed it up a little bit? What if we had a different conversation? What if we asked different questions? What if we started to actually talk about mental health and not just mental illness? What would that look like? Could we actually conceive of a place and a time and a space in our lives where things were well again? Well, if so, when would you like to have it by? My wife and I, we lived in Switzerland for a number of years. You know, the place high on a hill, there's a yodeling goat or something like that. The trains run on time, the watches are fine, the chocolate is to die for. Okay, they've got some problems with their cheese, it's got some holes in it, but the Swiss engineers are working on that as well. And Switzerland was an amazing place. We love Switzerland. And whenever I would tell people, hey, we lived in Switzerland, oftentimes I would hear the statement, oh, I have always wanted to go to Switzerland. To which I would say, no, you haven't. To which they say, yes, I have. Like ever since I watched Heidi story, or read that book, like I've always wanted to go. To which I'd say, no, you haven't. And they say, how dare you say I haven't? No, I'd say, no, if you really wanted to go, well, you would have gone already. You see, just wanting something out there in the future somewhere, that's what we call a pipe dream. But the moment you say on August the 1st, which just so happens to be Swiss National Day, I am flying to Switzerland. And the moment you make that out loud declaration with a time stamp on it is the moment your pipe dream just became your potential reality. It's got a timeline on it. So now all of a sudden, well, what do I need to do to make that? Well, I need to book tickets, I need to ask for time off work, I need to start saving money, and I need to ask the question, who is coming with me? When you start with the timeline, it changes the dialogue almost subconsciously in your mind, allowing you to end up at the final question, which is how. So let's just recap and summarize. We're asking the question, what is it that you want? Why is it that you want it? Tapping into positive motivation. Then asking, and when will we get it by? So that it's no longer just a pipe dream, but that it's an actual potential reality that we are working towards. In other words, wait for it, we have a goal. This is not just therapeutic in terms of it makes me feel good every session to get my issues helped, and I feel nurtured and I feel supported, which is very valuable. I don't mean to diminish it in any way, but let's stop coping. Let's ask the question, is there possibility for transformation? And if so, when? And now that I've got my when, let's ask the final question, how? And the how is not how will you do it? The how is, how will you know when you've done it? How will you know? In other words, can you conceive it in your mind's eye that life could be different? In psychology, we call this the miracle question. It's a typical question that is asked by counselors. If you were to go to sleep and the angel fairies came and sprinkled angel dust or waved a magic wand and you woke up in the morning and everything was different, things had changed, what would it look like? Can you conceive it in your mind's eye, what life would be like? Now, the interesting thing about neuroscience is that we have learned that the brain does not know the difference between that which is imagined and that which is real. I know some of you are sitting there thinking, well, maybe for your brain, but my brain, no, I know the difference between that which is imagined and that which is real, to which I'd say, actually, possibly not. You see, if we did an exercise right now where we all closed our eyes and we imagined sucking on a slice of lemon, your saliva glands will all of a sudden waken up and go crazy. Why? Because you're sucking on a piece of lemon? No, because you're imagining sucking on a piece of lemon, and therefore your biology will activate according to what's happening in your mind. So if you can conceive of a potential future where there is health and not illness, where there is tapping into this wealth, where you love your life, all of a sudden your brain activates it as though, hang on, I just conceived it, therefore what does Zig Ziglar say? If you can conceive it, you can achieve it. If you can genuinely believe that right there, that could be my possible future, well, the good news is that your psyche at a subconscious level all of a sudden starts reorienting itself. I can't go on that holiday, I'm saving for Switzerland. things automatically start to fall into place when you have the what, the why, the when, and the how will you know. The how you will do it seems to almost start to take care of itself. But the good news is there are some things that we can learn today that will help fast track us on that journey. So that's the introduction. I hope that was okay to go there. I just want to slap Australia over the head just to get a start off with, to be able to say, let's get out of the bucket of coping and let's get into transformation. Let's start to believe for health, and not just mental illness, but mental health. So let's talk about what we're dealing with. We're really dealing with the outworking of stress in our lives. It's important to recognize that there are 3 different types of stress that we can experience, and the first is called critical. There are some things that you can experience that will be a critical experience. It is a critical emergency, perhaps, for you. You might have received a diagnosis. You might have received bad news. You might have been in a car accident and you're shocked by what's transpiring. This is stressful. But can I also add that stress is critically important for your mental health and emotional well-being? We often think of stress as being a bad thing, and in fact, research has shown that if you believe that stress is bad, if you believe that stress leads to weight gain, aging, degenerative disease, mental illness, well, the research overwhelmingly demonstrates that indeed you would be correct. If you believe stress is bad, indeed, stress is bad. But the research at the same time shows that if you believe that stress is good, that stress actually adds to your health, adds to your performance capacity, adds to even relationships, well, the good news is, you're right. Stress is good for you. Now, hang on just a second. How can stress be both bad for you and good for you at the same time? Well, according to empirical studies, it's what you believe about stress that helps make the difference for you in your life. So yes, stress can be critical in terms of a critical incident that's negative, but it can also be critically important. So I think of it like wind on the high seas. If you are out and about in a sailing boat, but there's no wind, well, you're not going anywhere. You're just bobbing up and down, or not even up and down, just sitting dead calm. But the moment a little bit of wind comes and picks up the skirts, you can now go places in your life. A little bit of stress is actually good. And in fact, if we were to draw a bell curve on the board here, we recognize that the more stress you have, the greater your performance capacity becomes. However, only to a certain point. Because if there's too much wind, if there's a squall that's being whipped up on the high seas, well, then you have to batten down the hatch, where you pull down the sails and you wait for the storm to subside. And so once again, you are not going anywhere in your life. So it's all about having the right amount of stress that can make all of the difference. If you are experiencing stress in a manner that is too often, it's too severe, and it just never dissipates, this is the second type of stress which we call chronic stress. Chronic stress is where it doesn't abate. It keeps on going on and on and on. It might be a work colleague who's driving you crazy, or it might be an illness that just you can't seem to shake. And so if it is a pervasive issue, then it's going to be chronic in your life. But if you are having multiple different types of stress all at the same time, if you've received the diagnosis and on your way home you had the car accident only to find out that your daughter has run away from home, and if there's multiple things, then that's what we call compounded stress. In fact, I've drawn this illustration here in Adelaide in years gone by, and if you've ever heard me speak before, I've illustrated that everyone has one of these in their life. We call it the frustration tank or the stress bucket. And we have to acknowledge that we all have a level of stress. In fact, as we said before, it's critically important to have stress. But if we're having compounded stress and it's chronic, it won't go away, and just like all these different sources of stress are coming into our lives, well, by default, our frustration levels will increase. But there's only so much you can take. There's a line at the top, which is like the line on the kettle or the line on the iron that says, do not fill past this point. Because if your stress levels exceed the no-go zone, you enter into what we call the moron zone. Which essentially means you have taken more on than what you can handle. And this is where you start now spilling out and over onto other people. This is where it will start affecting your relationships, affecting your employment. The wheels are starting to fall off the wagon. And so, as we said before, what we typically advise in Australia is put a tap in. A coping mechanism to help relieve some of that frustration and pressure. And this is indeed helpful. But what would it look like if we also put a roof over the top of this bucket so that when the stress and the frustration comes, that it falls off like rain and doesn't penetrate or enter us in the first place? This is called early intervention and prevention for some of the stresses that we might encounter in our lives. But there's not just 3 different types of stress or manifestations, but we can also experience stress on a timeline, of which there are also 3 different levels. So first is called historical stress. There will be, in a room of this size, there will be people who are still wrestling with issues that have happened in your past. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean your childhood, but it might have been a past betrayal, or it might have been that you were made redundant, or there may have been some injustice, or there may have been a traumatic incident, and now you are struggling with post-traumatic stress. And so there are past things that can happen that when you go to bed at night, if you're reflecting on them about what transpired, well, this increases your chances of experiencing depression. So historical stress is highly correlated with depression. But at the other end of the spectrum, we've got this thing called future stress, where it hasn't happened yet, but you are anticipating it will, and it's going to be bad. So oftentimes, this will be experienced by students who are knowing that in 3 weeks' time, the major exams are coming up. Or if you've been learning to drive, this is your moment. You have to pass the driving test. Or if you, as a mental health professional, weren't given the notice, but all 160 mental health professionals, allied health professionals, you'll be up on stage later this afternoon giving your own presentation, and all of a sudden, your stress levels just went through the roof. But it hasn't happened yet. You're just anticipating that it might happen. And of course, therefore, it goes without saying that future stress is highly correlated with anxiety. But there's a form of stress that's smack bang in the middle. It's our present day stress. One could even describe this as the pressures of life. In fact, maybe even you experienced this morning, when you were getting ready to leave and you knew that, okay, Renella's, it's about 15 minutes away from where I live, so it's 22, leave a little bit of a 5-minute buffer, and so you're like, I think I've got everything, I've got my notepad, got my iPad, got my reading glasses, I've got my ticket, I got everything, all right, keys. Just let me grab the, oh, hang on, I thought I left them there. Where did I put those keys? Did anyone see my keys? I just want you to note the pleasantness of your voice. Did anyone see my keys? No, I can't see them. And then as 1 minute turns into 2 minutes, and your pace is starting to speed up, and you're like, did anyone see my keys? Turns into, hey, did you take my keys? Now, you're not overly aggressive yet. You're asking, but in a forceful manner, hey, did you take my keys? Because I got to go. Like the clock is ticking, and so pressure is increasing right about now. And they're like, no, I didn't take my keys. And so you're like, okay, well, where did I leave them? Did I put them in? Like, where did I put them in? And then the third statement that you make, it went from, hey, did anyone see my keys, to, hey, did you take my keys, to, hey, where did you put my keys? It morphed into an accusation. And when you are pressured, love cannot exist. Think about it for a second. Love leaves the building when you are pressured. When there is stress that is increasing in the here and now, I cannot be loving because you don't understand. Like, I'm going to be late. You must be Swiss. Like me, the trains run on time, right? And so this is a major crisis for some people to be late. But here's the deal. As your emotions increase, your intelligence decreases. The more emotional you get, the less intelligent you become. And so you are searching frantically everywhere. But if you were to just stop for a second and breathe and just take a moment, you know what? I'm going to slow everything down right now and just retrace my steps. I came in from the car. I was down walking at the beach. I had my beach towel. It was a bit sandy. I put it in the laundry and I bet they're in the laundry. And you walk over and sure enough, there they are. Present day stress, the pressures that we experience in life are a great detractor for mental health and emotional well-being, not only because love leaves the building, but because it helps serve to evaporate from our brain important neurotransmitters, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin. These well-being chemicals are what we need for mental health and emotional well-being, and if they are being evaporated from our brain, then we cannot be very well. So how do we contend with our pressure? I reckon if anybody knew a thing or two about pressure, I reckon a guy from the 1700s by the name of Daniel Bernoulli, he would know a thing or two. He lived in Switzerland, where all great academics come from. I believe, and just pray and hope. He, however, would have been under a little bit of pressure himself. He was at university, and so people had great expectations of him because his uncle and his father, Jacob in German and Jacques in French, and the other guy, I'm not sure, can't remember what his name was. It'll come to. Anyway, these guys were famous mathematicians themselves. In fact, one helped to invent calculus, and the other founded the theory of probability. I mean, we're talking about major mathematical milestones in our history. And so, hey, your uncle did this, your dad did this. Daniel, what are you going to do? So needless to say, he was under pressure, like the pressure that would have been on this young university student. So you know what he went on to study? He studied pressure. And he came up with the famous Bernoulli's principle. So if you remember back from your high school days, you would understand that, this is how we thought, at least conceived. Now it's being challenged, but this is how airplanes fly, because as velocity increases, there's a corresponding change in pressure. So that's Bernoulli's principle, in case you couldn't remember. Of course you could, but just for the three at the back who couldn't. Bernoulli's principle, yeah. So as velocity increases, there is a corresponding change in pressure. That's Bernoulli's principle. And so if there's a change in pressure, it helps what keeps airplanes in the air. The faster they go, that gives it a lift, if you will, because the pressure changes. Pressure is low on top, pressure is high underneath, lifts the airplane. But he didn't just study any old pressure, he studied hydromechanics. And I know that some of you are thinking, what on earth does physics and mathematics have to do with mental health? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because he went on to discover or develop a theory that is less well known from the Bernoulli's principle, and it is called the Venturi Effect. Not to be confused with the Ace Ventura effect. That's a whole other effect, another seminar for a different time. But the Venturi effect says the following. It relates to hydromechanics. So as a non-conductive fluid, for example, water, as the velocity of the flow increases, there will likewise be a corresponding change in pressure. Now, I'm going to have to draw this because I've lost some of you already thinking, I thought we were talking about men. Yeah, we are, and this is why. Okay, so here's what we're talking about. We have a large pipe, and let's just say that there is a body of water that is flowing through this pipe. But then all of a sudden, the pipe becomes constricted. So naturally and logically, in order to get this whole body of this volume of water through this constricted pipe, the velocity of the water is going to have to increase. My question is, what do you think will happen to the pressure of the water? Will it also increase or will it decrease? In fact, you might even remember from when you were a young kid and you were back in the day and age when we weren't so water conservative, you'd get out the hose and you'd spray your brothers or sisters or maybe the neighborhood childhood friends, and then if you really were clever, you would put your thumb over the end of the hose to constrict the space even further, making the water flow even faster, velocity increasing. So question, what happens to the pressure? And if you said, well, I remember the feeling right there against my thumb, I could feel the pressure, so therefore naturally the pressure increases, well, you would be forgiven for thinking that. Because the Venturi Effect discovered that as velocity increases, the water molecule pressure has to decrease in order for it to flow faster. In other words, the actual molecules themselves need to relax, and here's the principle, because the slower you go, the faster you get there. Remember the illustration? We just sat down, we slowed everything down, I just went, let me trace my steps slowly. And as we piece it together, ding, the emotion comes down, the intelligence starts to increase. Why? Because blood is now being restored to my prefrontal cortex. When we get stressed, all of the blood gets drained from our prefrontal cortex, from the frontal lobes of our brain, and goes to the limbic system, the emotional brain that operates purely by primal drive mode. And so we're running around in search mode, or we're running around with fight-flight kind of style. Well, let's create not just coping, but transformation of our biology, because here's the point. If you can renew your mind, you can change your brain. If you can change your brain, you'll influence what's happening in your biology. And if you change the biological or the physiological landscape of your brain and your body, you can influence in powerful ways your actions, your performance, and your behavior. Simply speaking, we simply say, I'm running out of room, but let me just draw it here. You can see this. Whatever you think has an impact on the way in which you feel. But the way in which you feel, it's as though your body, your physiology, is eavesdropping in on the subconscious dialogue and emotional experience. It changes hormones, it changes electrical activity in your brain, and also it helps determine what neurochemicals you're going to be producing or evaporating in your brain. But whatever has happening at a biological level, it's going to determine what you end up doing, what choice you make. And of course, whatever you do, you'll usually reflect on as we repeat the cycle. So let's just think about this for a second. If you're thinking negative thoughts, and therefore you are not feeling very good, and your body is chiming in with the wrong type of hormones, with the stress hormones, glucocorticoids, and then all of a sudden you make a poor decision and you reflect on it. It's like every rotation is like a screwdriver. And every rotation screws that screw in deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until you're stuck. And now I can't get out. And this is where we say, I need help and I don't know what to do. And that's where coping is useless. Well, just sit with the screw. No, unscrew me. I want to go in reverse order. And so the well-meaning pop psychologist will say, no problem. All you need to do is just think positive. Because if you think positive, you'll feel great. And then your body will chime in with the right hormones, chemicals, electrical activity, and then you'll make the right choice. Ta-da! Sign up for your local magazine. And 3 easy payments of $39.95 with steak knives included, because that does not work. Nothing against positive thinking. I mean, positive thinking is actually the holy grail of mental health, but it is not the place we start. If you are the parent of a little 11-year-old girl and she's giving a school presentation and she's standing there in front of a sea of people, And she's shaking like a leaf. And she's like, the paper is shaking. And you can even hear it in the microphone. So hold that paper still. And then all of a sudden her knees start shaking. And then she can't help herself. Like her body has taken over right now. And then we, as well-meaning parents, come along and we say, hey, sweetheart, it's okay. I attended the seminar by Dr. Robi, and all you have to do is just think positive. And if you think positive, like you'll feel much better. Your body will chime in with the right hormones, chemicals, electricals. And then you'll give an amazing presentation. So do well. And then you walk. And you better walk because she will hit you. Why? Because she can't think positive in this moment. Her biology has already taken over. But what if there was a way that we could actually reverse this cycle? What if we were to start by taking action, a certain course of action that could reverse this arrow and change our physiology and biology? And if we could change the way in which our body is responding to the situation or the circumstance, what if we could ultimately help feel much better? And now that I'm feeling confident, what if lastly we could engage the right mindset that would help us not just cope with the stressful situation, but deliver the performance of a lifetime? Now that right there is called mental health. Not mental illness, not coping. That right there is transformation. Does anyone want to know what action steps are required in order to bring about such transformational progress in a person's life? 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me ask the question again. Does anybody want to know? What are the action steps that we need to take? Well, if you really want to know, then make sure you come back after the break. I look forward to chatting with you soon.